This human baby saw a bear cub in the trash. What he did put everyone in tears. Let us know where you're watching from. If you love my content, consider supporting it with a super thanks. Also, don't forget to like and subscribe. It'll help us to remain in touch with amazing people like you. The morning sun filtered through the curtains of the modest Hayes family home, casting golden patterns across the kitchen floor. 2-year-old Jacob Hayes sat in his high chair by the window, spooning mushy cereal into his mouth between fits of giggles as birds hopped along the deck railing outside. His mother, Lily Hayes, hummed softly as she prepared lunch for her husband, Michael, who was typing away at his laptop at the kitchen table. "Look, Jacob. Birdies!" Lily pointed, smiling as her son's eyes lit up. Jacob bounced in his seat and pointed his chubby finger at the window, babbling happily. But suddenly, Jacob's laughter stopped. His bright blue eyes widened, and he stared intently at something beyond the birds. His cereal spoon clattered to the floor. "What's wrong, sweetie?" Lily asked, following his gaze to the trash bins at the edge of their property. At first, she saw nothing unusual, just their 2 green bins sitting against the fence that separated their yard from the edge of the forest. Then she noticed it too, a subtle movement, something shifting between the containers. Michael looked up from his work. "Everything okay?" "I'm not sure," Lily replied, moving closer to the window. "There's something out by the trash bins." In their small town of Pinewood, nestled at the forest's edge, wildlife sightings weren't uncommon. Deer often wandered into yards, and occasionally raccoons would make mischief with garbage cans. But what caught Jacob's attention that morning was something altogether different. Jacob pressed his tiny palms against the glass, his breakfast forgotten. His eyes remained fixed on the trash bins where a small, dark figure had emerged from between them. It moved slowly, almost dragging itself across the ground. "Oh my goodness!" Lily gasped, squinting to make out the creature. "Michael, I think it's a bear cub." Michael quickly joined them at the window. "A cub? All alone?" His brow furrowed with concern as he watched the small animal pawing weakly at the side of one of the bins. The bear cub couldn't have been more than a few months old. Its dark fur was matted and dirty, caked with mud in some places. Even from a distance, they could see that it looked terribly thin, its movements lacking the playful energy a young bear should have. It stretched up against one of the bins, trying to reach inside, then slumped back down, apparently exhausted by the effort. "Where's its mother?" Lily whispered, instinctively pulling Jacob's high chair back a few inches from the window. Bears were not to be taken lightly, and a mother bear was especially dangerous when her cubs were around. "I don't see any other bears," Michael said, scanning the tree line. "That's strange and concerning." They watched in silence as the cub made another feeble attempt to reach into the trash bin. It managed to knock the container over this time, spilling some garbage onto the grass. The cub immediately began nosing through the refuse, searching desperately for anything edible. "It looks half-starved," Lily said, her heart aching at the sight. The cub's ribs were visible through its fur, and it moved with a labored slowness that suggested weakness. Jacob, still watching intently, made a soft sound. Not his usual excited babble, but something quieter, almost like a whimper. He pointed again at the window, then looked back at his mother with questioning eyes. "Bear," Lily said softly. "That's a baby bear, Jacob. But it's not a happy bear, I think." As if understanding her words, Jacob's expression grew serious. He looked back at the cub, which had found something in the trash and was eating it with desperate speed. What happened next would change the quiet rhythm of Pinewood forever. While his parents were distracted, discussing what to do, Michael suggesting they call animal control, Lily wondering if there were wildlife rescuers nearby. Jacob began wriggling in his high chair, trying to free himself from the safety strap. His small fingers worked at the buckle with unexpected determination. "Jacob, stop that," Lily said absently, still focused on the bear cub. "Michael, do you think we should—" The click of the high chair buckle releasing interrupted her. Before either parent could react, Jacob had slipped down from his seat. His bare feet padded silently across the kitchen floor toward the door that led to the back deck. The door had been left slightly ajar to let in the fresh spring air. Just enough space for a small, determined toddler to push it open wider. "Jacob!" Lily cried, finally noticing her son's escape. But Jacob had already squeezed through the door opening and was standing on the deck, staring out at the yard where the bear cub continued to forage through the spilled garbage. Michael jumped to his feet, knocking over his coffee cup in his haste. "Jacob, no! Come back inside right now!" But Jacob, with the single-minded focus that only toddlers possess, was already navigating down the 3 shallow steps that led from the deck to the grass. In his hand, they noticed now, was his half-eaten piece of toast from breakfast, gripped tightly in his small fist. The bear cub, hearing the commotion, looked up from the trash. Its dark eyes found Jacob, who had stopped at the bottom of the steps, standing perfectly still on the lawn. Time seemed to freeze. A small boy and a bear cub, staring at each other across 20 feet of suburban lawn on a sunny spring morning. Lily's heart pounded so hard she thought it might burst from her chest. Every instinct screamed at her to run and grab her son, but Michael held her arm. "Don't make sudden movements," he whispered urgently. "Let me try to go slowly." But Jacob was already moving again, toddling forward on unsteady legs directly toward the bear cub. The piece of toast extended in front of him like an offering. The cub backed up a step, clearly wary. It made a small sound, not quite a growl, more of a whimper, and glanced toward the forest, as if hoping its mother might appear. "Oh, God," Lily breathed, her hand over her mouth. "Michael!" Michael was already easing the door open wider, preparing to rush out and grab their son. But something made him hesitate, the way the bear cub was responding. It wasn't showing aggression. Instead, it seemed almost as frightened as they were. Jacob stopped about 10 feet from the cub. With the innocent wisdom that sometimes seems uniquely granted to children, he did not try to approach further. Instead, he slowly sat down on the grass and held out his toast. "Bear," he said clearly, one of the few words in his limited vocabulary. "Bear, eat." The cub tilted its head, studying the small human with obvious confusion. Its nose twitched as it caught the scent of the toast. Bread with honey. A smell that must have been enticing to the hungry animal. Cautiously, the cub took a step forward, then another. Its movements were stiff, pained. Now that it was closer, they could see that one of its front paws was injured, the fur caked with dried blood. Jacob remained perfectly still, the toast extended. His expression showed no fear, only a solemn sort of wonder. The cub reached him and stretched out its neck, sniffing at the offered food. After a moment's hesitation, it gently took the toast from Jacob's hand. What happened next brought tears to Lily's eyes. As the cub ate the toast, Jacob slowly, carefully reached out his other hand. Before his parents could call out to stop him, his tiny fingers gently touched the top of the cub's head. The bear cub flinched at first, but didn't run away. It finished the toast and then, to everyone's amazement, moved closer to Jacob. The cub made a soft sound, almost like a purr, and nudged Jacob's hand with its nose. "My God," Michael whispered, his grip on the door handle loosening. "I've never seen anything like it." From across the street, they noticed Mrs. Bennet, their elderly neighbor, had stopped on her morning walk to stare at the scene unfolding in their yard. Her mouth hung open in shock. More neighbors began to appear, drawn by Mrs. Bennet's exclamations. Connor Adams from 2 doors down, the Reed family from across the road. Each stopped, transfixed by the sight of the small boy and the bear cub, now sitting barely a foot apart on the Hayes' lawn. Jacob was speaking to the cub in his limited toddler language, a mix of real words and babbling sounds. The cub listened, its head tilted, as if understanding the sentiment if not the words themselves. Then the young boy did something that would be captured in a photograph that would soon travel around the world. He reached into the pocket of his overalls and pulled out a slightly squashed blueberry muffin his mother had given him earlier. With great care, he broke off a piece and offered it to the cub. The cub accepted this second offering even more readily than the first, its initial fear apparently forgotten. When it finished eating, it moved even closer to Jacob, close enough that their faces were nearly touching. Jacob giggled and, with infinite gentleness, placed his small hand on the cub's injured paw. The cub did not pull away. Instead, it looked into Jacob's eyes with what could only be described as trust, a wild creature finding kindness where it perhaps expected only more pain. By now, a small crowd had gathered at the edge of the Hayes' property. No one spoke, no one moved. They merely watched in silent awe as a 2-year-old boy showed them all what compassion without fear looked like. And that was only the beginning of a story that would change not just one bear cub's life, but an entire community's understanding of kindness, courage, and connection. As the neighborhood watched in silent wonder, Savannah Reed, a wildlife photographer who had recently moved to Pinewood, lifted her camera. The soft click of the shutter captured the moment. A small boy with golden curls touching his forehead to that of a wild bear cub, their eyes closed in what looked like mutual understanding. It was a picture that would soon be seen by millions. "Should we do something?" whispered Haley Dawson, clutching her 6-year-old daughter's hand tightly. "Is it safe?" Michael Hayes stood poised at the edge of the deck, ready to dash forward at the slightest sign of danger, but something held him back. The tableau before him seemed almost sacred, a moment of connection so pure that interrupting it felt wrong. Lily, however, couldn't bear the tension any longer. "Jacob," she called softly, her voice trembling. "Jacob, sweetie, come to Mommy now." Jacob looked up at his mother's voice but made no move to leave his new friend. Instead, he patted the bear cub's head and smiled. "Bear hurt," he said clearly, pointing to the cub's injured paw. It was then that Ethan Marshall pushed his way through the growing crowd. Ethan, the town's veterinarian, had been driving by when he noticed the gathering. "What's going on here?" he asked, then stopped short when he saw the scene on the lawn. "Good Lord," he breathed. The cub, hearing a new voice, turned its head toward Ethan. For a moment, fear flashed in its eyes, and it pressed closer to Jacob, as if seeking protection from the small human who had shown it kindness. "It's injured," Michael called to Ethan, keeping his voice low and calm. "Left front paw, and it's clearly been separated from its mother." Ethan nodded, his experienced eyes taking in the cub's condition. "Malnourished, too," he observed. "Probably been on its own for days." He slowly set down his medical bag and crouched to make himself appear less threatening. "Has anyone called Wildlife Services?" Before anyone could answer, a truck roared up the street, brakes squealing as it came to an abrupt stop. The door swung open, and Logan Carter jumped out, rifle in hand. Logan was known throughout Pinewood as an avid hunter, and the sight of him armed and moving purposefully toward the Hayes yard sent a chill through the crowd. "Get that child away from there," Logan shouted, raising his rifle. Bear's a bear, don't matter how young it is. Jacob, startled by the loud voice, began to cry. The cub, sensing the child's distress, made a low, rumbling sound and shifted position, placing itself between Jacob and the approaching hunter. "Logan, stop!" Ethan stepped forward, holding up his hands. "Put the gun down. The situation is under control." "Under control," Logan scoffed, though he did lower his rifle slightly. "That's a wild animal with a baby. Nothing under control about it." Michael took advantage of the distraction to slowly approach his son. "Jacob," he said gently, "time to come inside now." But as Michael drew near, something unexpected happened. The bear cub, instead of showing aggression, nudged Jacob with its nose, as if encouraging him to go to his father. Then it backed away several steps, watching with what looked amazingly like understanding. Jacob stood up on his wobbly legs and took his father's hand, but he kept looking back at the cub. "Bear, bye-bye?" he asked, his lower lip trembling. "The bear needs help," Michael explained softly. "Dr. Marshall is going to help the bear." From the front of the crowd, Mrs. Bennett suddenly gasped and pointed toward the forest edge. "Look there!" she cried. All heads turned to see a larger bear emerging from the trees. The mother bear. The crowd instinctively stepped back, murmurs of fear rippling through the gathered neighbors. Logan raised his rifle again. "See? Told you. Now we got a real problem." But Savannah Reed, still clutching her camera, shook her head. "That's not a female," she said, her voice certain. "That's a young male, not much more than a juvenile himself." The larger bear approached cautiously, its attention fixed on the cub. The cub, sensing the other bear's presence, turned and made a soft whimpering sound. The older bear responded with a low grunt. "Siblings," Ethan said quietly, recognition dawning on his face. "They're siblings. The older one must have been searching for the little one." This new development changed everything. The cub, seeming suddenly energized by the appearance of its brother, tried to move toward him but stumbled on its injured paw. Jacob, still holding his father's hand, pointed and announced, "Bear family." The simplicity of the child's observation struck everyone present. Family. That's what they were witnessing. A reunion of family. Logan lowered his rifle completely now, his expression softening despite himself. "Well, I'll be damned," he muttered. As the crowd watched, the older bear approached the cub and gently nudged it with its nose, inspecting the injury. Then it looked up at the humans, its dark eyes wary but not aggressive. "They're both too young to be on their own," Ethan said. "The older one can't be more than 1.5 years. Something must have happened to their mother." This realization sent a ripple of sadness through the gathering. Even Logan, the hunter, removed his hat in a gesture that seemed almost respectful. Avery Johnson, who ran the local diner and was known for having her ear to the ground on all local news, spoke up. "There was talk among the hikers who came through last week. They mentioned seeing a female bear that had been shot. Poachers, they thought." A murmur of anger passed through the crowd. Poaching was a persistent problem in the forests around Pinewood, despite efforts to patrol and protect the wildlife. "These two have been orphaned," Savannah said softly, lowering her camera. "They've been trying to survive on their own." As if to confirm her words, the older bear made another attempt to help the cub, trying awkwardly to support its weight. But it was clear that the older sibling, itself still not fully grown, didn't know quite how to care for its injured brother. Jacob, watching this exchange with the pure, unfiltered empathy of a child, suddenly pulled away from his father and toddled back toward the bears. "Jacob!" Lily cried out, her heart in her throat. But before anyone could move to stop him, Jacob had reached into his overall pocket again and pulled out another small piece of muffin. He set it on the ground halfway between himself and the bears, then backed up to his father's side. The older bear sniffed the air, catching the scent of the food. After a moment's hesitation, it approached the offering, took it carefully in its mouth, and then brought it back to the cub. The crowd watched in amazement as the juvenile bear shared the food with its younger sibling. "I don't believe what I'm seeing," Connor Adams said, shaking his head in wonder. "They're starving," Ethan said, his voice tight with professional concern. "The little one especially won't last much longer without proper care." At his words, Jacob turned to his father with wide, pleading eyes. Even at 2 years old, he seemed to understand the gravity of the situation. "Help Bear," he said, his small voice firm and insistent. Michael looked from his son to the bears, then to Ethan. "What can we do?" he asked. Ethan considered for a moment. "I can treat the cub's injury, give it antibiotics, fluids, but we need to act quickly, and we need to decide what to do with both of them. They can't survive on their own, but keeping wild bears is illegal without proper licensing, not to mention dangerous." "The Wildlife Sanctuary in Oak Ridge," Savannah suggested. "They rehabilitate injured wildlife and release them when possible. I did a photography project there last month. They have the facilities for bear cubs." As the adults discussed options, the cub suddenly let out a pitiful whine and collapsed onto its side. The older bear nudged it urgently, making distressed sounds. Jacob began to cry, reaching toward the fallen cub. "Bear, get up! Bear, get up!" Ethan didn't hesitate any longer. He grabbed his medical bag and approached the bears slowly, speaking in a calm, low voice. "It's okay. I'm going to help. It's okay." To everyone's surprise, the older bear backed away, allowing the veterinarian to approach the cub. It was as if the animal somehow understood that this human meant help, not harm. Ethan knelt beside the cub and quickly examined it. "Severe dehydration, infection in the paw wound, malnourished. We need to get it on fluids right away." Jacob had wiggled free from his father again, and was now standing beside Ethan, his small hand reaching out to touch the cub's fur. "Fix Bear," he said simply, tears streaming down his face. The older bear watched from a short distance, pacing nervously but making no move to intervene. "I need to take it to my clinic," Ethan said, gently lifting the unconscious cub. It was so small and light in his arms. Far too light for a bear cub its age. Jacob followed Ethan as he carried the cub toward his truck, which was parked behind Logan's. The older bear started following too, creating a strange procession, the veterinarian with the cub, the toddler at his heels, and the juvenile bear trailing behind. "What about the bigger one?" Logan asked, still clutching his rifle but no longer raising it. "Can't just let it wander around town." "It won't leave its sibling," Savannah said confidently. "Bears are deeply loyal to family. It'll follow wherever we take the cub." And she was right. When Ethan carefully placed the cub in the back of his veterinary truck, the older bear stood watching, making soft sounds of distress. "We need to take this one too," Ethan decided. "They need to stay together." "How exactly do you plan to get a wild bear into your truck?" Logan asked skeptically. The answer came from an unexpected source. Jacob, who had been standing quietly beside the truck, walked over to the older bear. Everyone held their breath as the toddler stopped a few feet away from the bear and simply held out his hand. The bear looked at the small human, then at the truck where its sibling lay. It made a decision that seemed to defy wild animal behavior. It cautiously approached Jacob, sniffed his outstretched hand, and then walked past him to the truck, jumping into the back beside the cub. A collective gasp rose from the crowd. Savannah's camera clicked rapidly, capturing every moment of the extraordinary scene. "Well, I guess that solves that problem," Ethan said, looking as stunned as everyone else. He turned to Michael and Lily. "Would you and Jacob like to come to the clinic? I think your son has a special connection with these bears that might help keep them calm during treatment." Michael and Lily exchanged a look, both thinking the same thing. This day had already veered so far from normal that nothing seemed impossible anymore. "Yes," Lily said, "we'll come." As Ethan prepared to close the back of the truck, Jacob suddenly rushed forward. "Wait!" he cried, reaching into his pocket one last time. He pulled out a small, well-loved teddy bear, his favorite comfort object that he carried everywhere. With solemn ceremony, the 2-year-old placed his teddy bear next to the unconscious cub. Then he looked up at Ethan with eyes that seemed far older than his years. "Bear not alone now," he declared. There wasn't a dry eye in the crowd as Ethan gently closed the truck's back door. Even Logan Carter was surreptitiously wiping at his face. As the Hayes family climbed into the cab of Ethan's truck, Savannah approached them. "This is an incredible story," she said, showing them the preview of photos on her camera. "With your permission, I'd like to document what happens next. People need to see this." Michael looked at the image on the camera's display. His son's forehead pressed against that of the bear cub, both with eyes closed, a moment of pure connection between human and wild animal. "Yes," he said quietly, "I think people do need to see this." The truck pulled away from the curb, leaving the stunned neighborhood watching in its wake. No one moved for several long moments. Then Mrs. Bennett spoke, her voice thick with emotion. "In all my 78 years," she said, "I never thought I'd see such a thing. That child. There's something special about that child." Connor Adams nodded in agreement. And to think, if the bears had wandered into anyone else's yard, they might have been shot on sight. Logan shifted uncomfortably at this, but he didn't disagree. Instead, he said, "Those cubs' mama was killed by poachers. That ain't right. Maybe I could help patrol the woods a bit, keep an eye out for illegal hunting." Avery Johnson looked at him in surprise. "That would be wonderful, Logan. I know the forest ranger is short-staffed." As the crowd slowly dispersed, returning to their homes and daily routines, something had changed in Pinewood. A toddler's compassion had awakened something in each of them. A reminder of connection, of empathy that transcended the boundaries between human and wild. But the story of Jacob Hayes and the bear cubs was far from over. At Ethan Marshall's veterinary clinic on the edge of town, a far more complex drama was about to unfold. The clinic was small, primarily designed for domestic pets rather than wildlife. As Ethan pulled into the parking lot, he turned to Michael and Lily. "I've treated injured wildlife before, but never bears. This is going to be a learning experience for all of us." Michael nodded, glancing back at his son, who was peering anxiously through the rear window at the bears in the truck bed. "What can we do to help?" "First, I need to get the cub inside and start treatment," Ethan said. "The concern is the older bear. It's calm now, but once we separate it from the cub..." As if understanding the conversation, the juvenile bear let out a low rumble when Ethan opened the back of the truck. It stood protectively over its unconscious sibling. "Bear sad," Jacob said, pressing his face against the window. "Bear scared." Lily stroked her son's hair. "I know, sweetie. Dr. Marshall is going to help both bears feel better." Jessica Brooks, Ethan's veterinary assistant, emerged from the clinic, stopping short when she saw what was in the back of the truck. "Ethan, are those bears?" "Long story," Ethan replied. I need the treatment room prepped, IV fluids, antibiotics, and call Dr. Carter at the Oak Ridge Wildlife Sanctuary. Tell her we have 2 orphaned bears, 1 critical. Jessica hurried back inside, while Ethan considered the logistics of moving the injured cub without agitating the older bear. Once again, it was Jacob who provided the solution. Before his parents could stop him, he'd unbuckled his car seat and was scrambling out of the truck. He toddled directly to the older bear and spoke to it in his limited vocabulary, pointing alternately at the clinic and the injured cub. Remarkably, the bear seemed to listen. When Ethan cautiously approached to lift the cub, the older bear backed away, allowing him access, but watching his every move with intense focus. Unbelievable, Jessica whispered, returning to help. It's like they understand each other. Ethan carried the unconscious cub into the clinic, with Jacob walking beside him. The older bear followed at a short distance, its movements hesitant but determined not to be separated from its sibling. Inside the treatment room, Ethan gently placed the cub on the examination table. Jessica, block off the waiting room, make sure no one else comes in while we have a wild bear walking around. The cub looked even smaller and more fragile under the bright clinic lights. Its breathing was shallow, its injured paw swollen to nearly twice its normal size. Michael lifted Jacob so he could see the cub on the table. The bear is very sick, he explained gently, but Dr. Marshall is going to make it all better. Jacob nodded solemnly, reaching out to touch the cub's ear. Bear sleep, he said. Bear wake up soon. Ethan worked quickly, inserting an IV line for fluids and administering antibiotics. He cleaned the infected paw wound, revealing deep puncture marks. Looks like it might have been caught in a trap, he said grimly. That would explain the separation from their mother. She might have been trying to free it when the poachers came. The older bear had settled in a corner of the room, watching the proceedings with intelligent eyes. Occasionally, it would make soft grunting sounds, as if checking on its sibling. How old do you think they are? Lily asked, keeping a protective arm around Jacob, who was utterly focused on the treatment of the cub. The little one's probably 4 or 5 months old. The older one might be from last year's litter, about 1.5 years. Young black bears often stay with their mothers for up to 2 years, learning survival skills. Ethan attached a pulse oximeter to the cub's ear. Their mother must have been an experienced parent to have cubs from consecutive seasons. Which makes her death even more tragic, Michael said quietly. As Ethan continued his treatment, the clinic door chimed. Jessica went to intercept whoever had entered despite the closed sign she'd placed on the door. A moment later, she returned with Savannah Reed and, surprisingly, Logan Carter. Sorry to intrude, Savannah said, but we thought you might need help. Logan knows a lot about bears from his hunting experience, and I've called some contacts at wildlife conservation organizations. Logan looked uncomfortable in the clinical setting, but nodded curtly. Figured my knowledge might be useful, even if it comes from the other side of the fence, so to speak. Ethan acknowledged them with a quick glance. Any help is welcome. The cub is stabilizing, but it's going to need specialized care. My contact at Oak Ridge Wildlife Sanctuary is on her way, Savannah informed them. They have the facilities for long-term rehabilitation. Jacob, who had been quietly watching the cub, suddenly pointed excitedly. Bear, wake! Bear, wake! Everyone turned to see the cub's eyes fluttering open. It made a weak sound, somewhere between a whimper and a growl. Immediately, the older bear rose from its corner and approached the table, making soft vocalizations. Ethan stepped back, giving the bears space while ensuring the IV line wasn't disturbed. What happened next brought fresh tears to everyone's eyes. The older bear gently nuzzled the cub's face, and the cub responded by weakly licking its sibling's nose. Then the cub turned its head and saw Jacob, who was still being held up by his father to see over the table edge. The cub made a soft sound and tried to move toward the boy. Jacob reached out, and for the second time that day, human child and bear cub touched, a gentle connection that seemed to transcend the natural boundaries between wild and tame. "Bear better now," Jacob said confidently. Ethan checked the cub's vitals. "He's actually right. The fluids are helping already. The infection will take time to clear, but if we can get nutrition into it soon, the prognosis is positive." Logan, who had been hanging back by the door, finally approached the examination table. He studied the bears with a mixture of wariness and fascination. "Never seen bears behave like this with humans," he admitted. "Especially not with a young one injured." "I think they know we're trying to help," Lily said, watching as Jacob continued to communicate with the cub in his own way. A mixture of simple words, sounds, and gentle touches that the wild animal seemed to understand. "Or maybe they're just responding to him," Logan suggested, nodding toward Jacob. "Children have a way with animals sometimes. My grandmother used to say some kids have the touch, a special connection with wild things." Michael had never been one for mystical explanations, but after what he'd witnessed today, he couldn't dismiss the idea. There was something undeniably special about the way his son interacted with these bears, a purity of connection that defied rational explanation. The clinic door chimed again, and Jessica returned with a tall woman in a ranger uniform. "This is Dr. Haley Carter from Oak Ridge Wildlife Sanctuary," she introduced. Dr. Carter surveyed the scene before her with professional interest. "When you said you had bear cubs in a veterinary clinic, I thought there must be some mistake," she said to Ethan. "But I see it's true." Her gaze lingered on the unusual tableau, the injured cub on the table, the older bear standing guard, and the small boy seemingly mediating between them. "The cubs responding well to initial treatment," Ethan reported. "IV fluids, antibiotics for the infected paw wound. I've given it a mild sedative to keep it calm, but not enough to fully anesthetize." Dr. Carter approached carefully, respecting the older bear's space. "And this one? Just following its sibling?" "They're orphaned," Savannah explained. "Mother likely killed by poachers." Dr. Carter's expression hardened briefly. Unfortunately common, but unusual to see siblings from different litters staying together after losing their mother. They must have a strong bond. She examined the cub without touching it, then glanced at the older bear. "We can accommodate both at the sanctuary. We have a specialized enclosure for orphaned cubs, with minimal human contact to prevent habituation. The goal would be rehabilitation and release back into the wild once they're old enough to survive independently." Jacob, who had been listening to the adults talk, suddenly spoke up. "Bears stay together?" Dr. Carter smiled at the child. "Yes, young man, the bears will stay together at the sanctuary." This seemed to satisfy Jacob, who nodded seriously before turning back to the cub. "You go new home," he told it. "Get stronger. Play with brother." The cub, more alert now as the fluids replenished its dehydrated body, made a soft huffing sound that almost sounded like a response. "We should transport them soon, Doctor," Carter said. "I have a specialized vehicle with a bear transport cage. The sooner we get them to the sanctuary, the better." While the adults prepared for the transfer, Jacob remained focused on the bears. He had retrieved his teddy bear from where it had fallen on the floor and was showing it to the cub. "This bear, you bear." "Friends," he explained seriously. Michael watched his son with a mixture of pride and wonder. Most children his age would be terrified of wild animals, especially predators like bears. Yet Jacob showed no fear, only compassion. Where had such empathy come from in one so young? As Dr. Carter and Ethan discussed the logistics of transferring the bears to the sanctuary vehicle, Savannah approached Michael and Lily. "I've been documenting everything," she said, showing them more photos on her camera. "This story, it's extraordinary. A child showing adults what compassion truly means. Bears responding to human kindness with trust instead of fear." She paused, looking at them earnestly. "With your permission, I'd like to share this with a wider audience. People need stories like this, reminders of connection in a world that often feels divided." Michael and Lily exchanged a glance. They were private people by nature, and the thought of their family, especially their son, being thrust into the public eye gave them pause. And yet they couldn't deny the power of what had happened today. "What do you think would come of sharing it?" Lily asked cautiously. Savannah considered this. Awareness, for one thing, about poaching, about orphaned wildlife, maybe support for sanctuaries like Oak Ridge, but beyond that, she looked over at Jacob, still earnestly communicating with the bears. Sometimes the world needs to be reminded of innocence, of compassion without agenda. Your son showed that today. Michael nodded slowly. "Let us think about it. This has been a lot to process in one day." The moment was interrupted by an excited cry from Jacob. "Look, bear standing!" They turned to see the cub attempting to stand on the examination table, wobbling on 3 legs while keeping its injured paw elevated. The 4th line had been removed, and though the cub was clearly weak, there was a new energy in its movements. Dr. Carter smiled. "That's a very good sign. Bears are resilient creatures. With proper care, both of these cubs have an excellent chance of full recovery." As they prepared to move the bears to the sanctuary transport, Jacob became suddenly quiet. His lower lip trembled as he realized his new friends were leaving. "Bear, bye-bye?" he asked his mother, eyes filling with tears. Lily knelt beside her son. "The bears need special care, sweetie. Dr. Carter is going to take them to a place where they can get stronger and learn to be wild bears again." Jacob considered this, his small face serious. Then he brightened. "Visit bears?" The adults exchanged glances. Dr. Carter cleared her throat. "Normally, we minimize human contact during rehabilitation, but..." She looked at the unusual bond between the child and the cubs. "Perhaps we could make an arrangement for supervised visits. It might actually help the transition, given the circumstances." Jacob's face lit up. He turned to the bears, particularly the cub that was now watching him intently from the table. "I visit," he told it solemnly. "Promise." The transfer to Dr. Carter's vehicle went more smoothly than anyone anticipated. The cub was placed in a special transport carrier, and remarkably, the older bear entered the adjacent carrier without resistance, seemingly understanding that they were being kept together. Before the carriers were loaded into the vehicle, Jacob insisted on saying goodbye. He stood before the carriers, his teddy bear clutched in one hand. After a moment's consideration, he placed the teddy bear into the cub's carrier. "Keep," he said simply. "Remember Jacob." The cub sniffed at the stuffed toy, then carefully pulled it closer with its good paw. As Dr. Carter's vehicle pulled away from the clinic, with the bears safely inside, Jacob waved until it disappeared from view. Then he turned to his parents, his face streaked with tears but wearing a smile of satisfaction. "Bears be okay," he declared, with the absolute certainty that only children possess. What none of them realized that day was how far the ripples of this encounter would spread, or how deeply it would affect not just the Hayes family and the orphaned bears, but an entire community and beyond. The Hayes family returned to their home, which now felt somehow different. as if the extraordinary events of the morning had altered the very air within it. Jacob, exhausted from the emotional day, fell asleep in the car on the ride back, his small face peaceful despite the tear tracks still visible on his cheeks. "What do we tell him when he wakes up?" Lily whispered as Michael carried their sleeping son into the house. "He's going to ask about the bears constantly." Michael laid Jacob gently on his small bed, tucking his favorite blanket around him. Without his teddy bear, now in the possession of an orphaned bear cub miles away, Jacob instinctively grabbed the corner of his blanket and pulled it close to his face. "We tell him the truth," Michael said finally, "that the bears are getting better and that he helped them, and that sometimes caring for something means letting it go where it needs to be." Lily nodded, brushing a golden curl from her son's forehead. "He's too young to understand all of that." "Maybe," Michael conceded. But he understood something today that many adults never grasp. He saw past fear to what was needed. He saw the bears as beings deserving of compassion, not as threats or symbols or trophies. They closed Jacob's door partway and went to the kitchen, where the morning's breakfast dishes still sat abandoned, a reminder of how quickly ordinary life could transform into something extraordinary. As Lily began washing the dishes, Michael's phone buzzed with a text message. "It's from Savannah Reed," he said, reading the screen. "She wants to know if we've made a decision about the photos." Lily dried her hands on a towel and came to look over his shoulder. "I still don't know, Michael. I'm worried about what it might mean for Jacob, for our privacy." Michael scrolled through the message. "She says several major wildlife conservation organizations have already expressed interest based just on her description of what happened. They want to use Jacob's story to raise awareness about poaching and orphaned wildlife." Lily bit her lip, conflicted. "It is a worthy cause," she admitted. "And if it helps other animals like those cubs—" She also mentioned something else, Michael continued, his voice taking on a note of surprise. "Logan Carter, the hunter who showed up with the rifle. Apparently, he's organizing a community meeting tonight at the town hall about poaching and wildlife protection. He's asked if we would attend." Lily raised her eyebrows. "Logan Carter? The same man who was ready to shoot those bears this morning?" "People can change," Michael said thoughtfully. "Maybe what he saw today affected him more than we realized." Before they could discuss it further, there was a knock at their door. Michael opened it to find Connor Adams standing on their porch, looking somewhat awkward. Connor, a retired construction foreman, had lived 2 doors down for years, but they had never been particularly close neighbors. "Sorry to disturb you folks," Connor said, removing his cap. "Just wanted to check how the boy is doing. And the bears, too, if you've had any news." Michael invited him in, surprised by the visit. "Jacob's resting. The bears are on their way to the wildlife sanctuary in Oak Ridge. The cub should recover with proper care." Connor nodded, turning his cap in his hands. "That's good to hear, real good." He cleared his throat. "Look, I'm not one for speeches, but what I saw today, what your boy did, it got me thinking about things, about how we treat the wild places around us." Lily offered him coffee, which he accepted gratefully. "Been living here 40 years, Connor continued, settling at their kitchen table. "Used to be, we all understood that we shared these woods with the creatures in them. My daddy taught me to hunt, but he also taught me respect. 1 deer, 1 season. Nothing with young. Nothing you weren't going to eat." He stared into his coffee cup. "Somewhere along the way, some folks lost that respect. Started seeing the forest as something to use up instead of something to live alongside." Michael sat across from him. "Is that why Logan Carter is organizing a meeting tonight?" Connor looked up, surprised. You heard about that already? Yeah, Logan's arranging it, which is something, considering he's been one of the most aggressive hunters in the county for years. He shook his head, a hint of wonder in his voice. Your boy really shook something loose in that man today? We're still trying to process everything ourselves, Lily admitted, joining them at the table. Connor nodded understandingly. Whole town's buzzing about it. Mrs. Bennett's telling anyone who'll listen that your Jacob has the gift, whatever that means in her mind. He chuckled. Though, after what I saw today, I'm half inclined to believe her. As they talked, the sound of small footsteps in the hallway announced Jacob's awakening. He appeared in the kitchen doorway, rubbing his eyes sleepily. Hey, champ, Michael said, opening his arms. Jacob climbed into his lap, still drowsy. Bears? He asked immediately, looking around as if expecting to find them in the kitchen. The bears are going to their new home, remember? Lily reminded him gently, where Dr. Carter will help them get stronger. Jacob nodded solemnly, then noticed Connor. He studied the older man with curious eyes. You don't remember me, do you, little fella? Connor said with a smile. I was there this morning when you made friends with those bear cubs. That was a mighty brave thing you did. Jacob ducked his head shyly, hiding his face against his father's shirt. He's normally quite reserved with strangers, Lily explained. Unlike with wild bears, apparently, Connor said with a good-natured laugh. Jacob lifted his head at the mention of bears. Visit bears? He asked his parents again. Michael ran a hand through his son's hair. Soon, buddy. Dr. Carter said we could visit them soon. This seemed to satisfy Jacob, who then slid off his father's lap and went to the window, looking out at the backyard where the now empty trash bin still stood. Connor watched him for a moment, then turned back to Michael and Lily. About that meeting tonight, I think you folks should come. Your experience today, it might help people understand what's at stake. Michael glanced at Lily, who nodded slightly after a moment's consideration. We'll be there, Michael said, though I'm not sure what we could contribute. Connor stood to leave. Just telling what you saw. Sometimes that's enough to change minds. He paused at the door. Meetings at 7, Town Hall. After Connor left, Lily turned to Michael. Do you really think one meeting can make a difference? People like Logan Carter have been hunting these woods their whole lives. Michael watched as Jacob continued to gaze out the window, as if waiting for the bears to return. I don't know, but after what we witnessed today, I'm beginning to think anything is possible. The town hall was packed that evening, a surprise for a hastily called meeting on a weeknight. It seemed the entire community of Pinewood had turned out, curious about the morning's events and what Logan Carter, of all people, had to say about wildlife protection. Michael and Lily arrived a few minutes late, having had trouble finding a babysitter on short notice. In the end, they'd brought Jacob with them, though they planned to leave early if he became restless. As they entered the hall, a hush fell over the crowd. People turned in their seats to look at them, or, more specifically, at Jacob, who was perched in Michael's arms, taking in the unfamiliar setting with wide eyes. Logan Carter stood at the front of the room, in the middle of what appeared to be an impassioned speech. He nodded acknowledgement to the Hayes family as they slipped into seats near the back. As I was saying, Logan continued, turning back to the audience, what happened this morning was a wake-up call for me, and it should be for all of us. He paced across the front of the room, his usual hunting cap absent, his manner more thoughtful than Michael remembered from their brief encounter that morning. I've been hunting these woods since I was old enough to hold a rifle, Logan said. My grandfather taught me, and his father taught him. It's part of our heritage here in Pinewood." Murmurs of agreement rose from several audience members. "But there's a difference, a mighty big difference, between hunting for your family's table and what's been happening lately." Logan's voice hardened. "Poaching. Taking bears out of season, leaving cubs orphaned, taking trophies and leaving the meat to rot. That ain't hunting. That's just killing." An uncomfortable silence fell over the room. "Now, I know some of you are thinking, that's rich coming from Logan Carter," he continued with a self-deprecating smile. "And you'd be right to think it. I've pushed the boundaries of hunting regulations myself more than once. But what I saw today—" He trailed off, seemingly struggling for words. "I saw a child, not even 3 years old, show more understanding of how we should treat the creatures we share this land with than most of us adults have managed in our entire lives." Many heads turned toward Jacob again, who was now playing quietly with a small toy car on his mother's lap, oblivious to the attention. "Those bear cubs didn't have to end up orphaned," Logan continued. "Their mother didn't have to die. That's on us, all of us who've looked the other way when we've heard gunshots out of season or seen trucks loaded with illegal kills on back roads." Avery Johnson stood up from her seat near the front. "What exactly are you proposing, Logan?" "We can't police the entire forest." "No, we can't," Logan agreed. "But we can organize. Set up a community watch program, working with the forest rangers. Report suspicious activities. Make it known that Pinewood doesn't tolerate poaching. And for those who depend on hunting for their livelihood," someone else called out. "Legal, regulated hunting isn't the problem," Logan clarified. "I'm not suggesting we stop all hunting. I'm talking about respecting seasons, limits, and most importantly, not killing females with young. That's how we end up with orphaned cubs like we saw today." The discussion continued, with various community members offering suggestions or raising concerns. Through it all, Michael noted how many people kept glancing at Jacob, as if he were some kind of touchstone. A reminder of the pure empathy that had sparked this unexpected gathering. About halfway through the meeting, the door opened, and Savannah Reed slipped in, accompanied by a tall man in a forest ranger's uniform. They stood at the back, listening to the ongoing debate. When a natural pause came in the discussion, Savannah stepped forward. "If I may," she said, addressing both Logan and the audience, "I have some news that might be relevant to this conversation." Logan nodded for her to continue. "I've just come from the Oak Ridge Wildlife Sanctuary," Savannah announced. "The bear cubs are doing well. The younger one is responding to treatment, and both are settling into their temporary enclosure." A ripple of what sounded surprisingly like relief went through the crowd. Dr. Carter also confirmed what we suspected. The cubs were orphaned due to poaching. Based on their condition and behavior, their mother was likely killed within the past week. The ranger who had accompanied Savannah stepped forward then. "I'm Ranger Bennett from the State Forest Service," he introduced himself. "We've actually been investigating several reports of poaching in this area. The death of this mother bear is consistent with other incidents we've documented." A murmur ran through the audience, concern mixed with anger. "If the community is willing to organize as Mr. Carter suggests," the ranger continued, "it would be an enormous help to our department. We're understaffed and these forests are vast. Having extra eyes and ears could make all the difference." As the meeting progressed, it became clear that something significant was shifting in Pinewood. People who had never spoken up about conservation were suddenly offering to volunteer for forest patrols. Hunters, who had previously kept to themselves, were sharing information about suspicious activities they'd witnessed. Jacob, growing restless after sitting still for so long, began squirming in Lily's lap. Michael decided it was time to take him home. As they stood to leave discreetly, Logan noticed and paused in the middle of discussing patrol schedules. "Before the Hayes family leaves," he said, causing all eyes to turn to them once again, "I think we owe them our thanks, especially that little boy." Michael froze, uncomfortable with the sudden attention. Lily pulled Jacob closer protectively. Logan approached them, stopping a respectful distance away. "What your son did today, his courage, his compassion, it reminded a lot of us of something important we'd forgotten, something about innocence and seeing with new eyes." He cleared his throat, clearly emotional. "So thank you for being there this morning, for letting him follow his heart." To everyone's surprise, Jacob looked directly at Logan and spoke clearly. "Bear's okay?" Logan knelt to be at eye level with the child. "Yes, son, the bears are okay, and we're going to try to make sure a lot more bears stay okay from now on." Jacob nodded, satisfied, and reached for his father to be picked up. As the Hayes family made their way to the exit, people touched their shoulders, murmured thanks, or simply nodded in acknowledgement. It was an odd feeling, being suddenly at the center of their community's attention after years of quiet, routine living. Outside, as Michael was securing Jacob in his car seat, Savannah approached them. "I wanted to catch you before you left," she said. "I've been thinking about the best way to share this story, and I realized I was getting ahead of myself. This isn't just my story to tell, it's yours, and most especially it's Jacob's." Lily leaned against the car door. "We're still not sure about putting Jacob in the spotlight, he's so young." Savannah nodded understandingly. "Which is why I have a proposal. Instead of just publishing the photos and story in wildlife magazines or news outlets, I'd like to work on a children's book. Something that captures the spirit of what happened, but gives you control over how Jacob is portrayed." "A children's book?" Michael repeated, surprised. "Yes, something simple but meaningful that teaches children about empathy for wildlife, about conservation, about seeing past fear to understanding." Savannah pulled out her phone and showed them some rough mock-ups she'd already created. "We could use proceeds to support the wildlife sanctuary and conservation efforts." Michael and Lily exchanged glances, intrigued by this unexpected direction. "Could we think about it?" Lily asked. "It's been a very full day." "Of course," Savannah assured them, handing them her card. "Take all the time you need." As they drove home in the gathering darkness, Jacob fell asleep in his car seat, exhausted from the day's events. Michael and Lily spoke in hushed tones about the meeting, the unexpected community response, and Savannah's proposal. "A book," Lily mused. "It would be a way to share the message without exploiting Jacob himself." Michael nodded, and it could help other orphaned wildlife through the donations. He glanced at his son in the rearview mirror. "What do you think he'd make of becoming a character in a storybook?" Lily smiled softly. "Probably just ask if the bear cubs would be in it too." They laughed quietly together, some of the day's tension finally easing. Whatever came next, whether a children's book, community conservation efforts, or simply returning to their normal lives, something fundamental had shifted. Not just in their community, but in their understanding of their place within it and of their son's unique spirit. 3 weeks passed. Spring deepened, filling the forests around Pinewood with new growth and activity. In the Hayes household, life had mostly returned to its regular rhythms, though there were notable changes. Jacob asked about the bears every day, usually first thing in the morning. "Visit bears today?" became his standard greeting when he woke up. Michael and Lily had promised him they would visit the sanctuary soon, but Dr. Carter had requested they wait until the cubs were fully stabilized in their new environment. The younger cub, whom the sanctuary staff had started calling Toast after the story of Jacob's first offering, had developed complications from the infection. Its recovery was proceeding, but more slowly than initially hoped. The community changes were even more evident. Logan Carter, once known primarily for his aggressive hunting tactics, had emerged as an unlikely conservation leader. The volunteer forest patrol he'd organized already had 20 members who took turns monitoring remote areas for signs of poaching. Savannah Reed had become a frequent visitor to the Hayes home, working with them to develop her children's book concept. After much discussion, Michael and Lily had agreed to the project, with certain conditions. Jacob's real name wouldn't be used, the focus would be on the message rather than their specific family, and a significant portion of proceeds would go to wildlife protection. It was during one of Savannah's visits that they received the call they'd been waiting for. That was Dr. Carter, Michael announced, hanging up the phone. The cubs are doing well enough for visitors now. She invited us to come to the sanctuary tomorrow. Jacob, who had been coloring at the coffee table while the adults discussed book illustrations, looked up with shining eyes. "See bears tomorrow?" "Yes, buddy," Michael confirmed with a smile. "We're going to see the bears tomorrow." Jacob leapt up with excitement, sending crayons rolling across the floor. "Bears remember Jacob?" "I'm sure they will," Lily assured him, though she privately wondered if the cubs would recall their brief encounter with her son. Savannah, who had been taking notes during their conversation, looked up with interest. "Would you mind if I came along? The sanctuary has given me permission to photograph the cubs for conservation education materials. It would be a good opportunity to get images for our book project, too." Michael and Lily agreed, and plans were made for the following day's expedition to Oak Ridge Wildlife Sanctuary, about an hour's drive from Pinewood. That night, Jacob insisted on wearing his bear shirt, a brown pullover with a bear silhouette that his grandmother had coincidentally given him months before. He also carefully selected a small bag of blueberries from the refrigerator, solemnly informing his parents that they were for bears. "You know, you probably won't be able to feed them," Lily explained gently as she tucked him in. "The sanctuary has to be careful about what the bears eat, and they need to learn to find food on their own eventually." Jacob considered this, his small brow furrowed. "Bears need to be wild," he said finally, showing unusual comprehension for a child his age. "That's right," Michael said, impressed. "They need to remember how to be wild bears so they can take care of themselves in the forest someday." Jacob nodded, then asked the question that had clearly been on his mind. "Teddy Bear still with Little Bear?" Michael and Lily exchanged glances. They had no idea if the cubs still had Jacob's beloved teddy bear, or if the sanctuary staff had removed it from the enclosure. "We'll find out tomorrow," Lily promised, kissing his forehead. The next morning dawned clear and warm. Jacob was up at sunrise, already dressed in his bear shirt, and waiting impatiently by the front door long before it was time to leave. The hour-long drive to Oak Ridge felt even longer with Jacob asking, "Are we there yet?" every few minutes. Savannah met them in the sanctuary parking lot, camera equipment slung over her shoulder. "Dr. Carter is waiting for us," she said, leading the way to the administration building. Oak Ridge Wildlife Sanctuary sprawled across several hundred acres of mixed forest and meadow. Most of it was off-limits to visitors, designed to give rehabilitating animals the space and privacy they needed. Only a small education center near the entrance was regularly open to the public. Dr. Carter greeted them warmly in her office. "I have to say, I've been looking forward to this visit. Those cubs have become quite famous among our staff." "How are they doing?" Lily asked. The older one, we've been calling him Guardian, is thriving. Healthy appetite, good weight gain, appropriate wariness of humans. Dr. Carter pulled up some photos on her computer. The younger one had us worried for a while. The infection was more severe than we initially thought, and he stopped eating for several days. But he turned a corner last week. Jacob, who had been uncharacteristically quiet since entering the unfamiliar building, perked up at the mention of the younger cub. "Little Bear better?" Dr. Carter smiled at him. "Yes, he's much better now. And do you know what helped him start eating again?" She turned her computer screen to show them a picture that made Lily gasp. There was the small cub, curled up in straw bedding, with Jacob's well-worn teddy bear clutched under one paw. "He carries that bear everywhere," Dr. Carter said. "We normally remove any human items from wildlife enclosures. It's important that the animals don't form attachments to human scents or objects if they're to be released. But in this case," she shrugged. "Our staff veterinarian believed the comfort object was actually helping his recovery. The cub's stress levels decreased measurably when he had the teddy bear nearby." Jacob beamed with pride. "Teddy helps Little Bear." "It certainly seems that way, Doctor," Carter agreed. "Ready to see them in person?" She led them through a series of staff-only areas to a remote section of the sanctuary. As they walked, she explained the rehabilitation process for orphaned bear cubs. "Our goal is always to return them to the wild if possible. With cubs this young, it's challenging. They've missed crucial months of learning from their mother. But we have protocols for minimal human contact and gradually teaching them foraging skills." They arrived at an observation deck overlooking a large, naturalistic enclosure. The space was designed to mimic a forest edge, with trees, boulders, a small stream, and various forms of natural enrichment. "The cubs are usually active this time of morning," Dr. Carter said, scanning the enclosure. "Ah, there, by the hollow log." Everyone looked where she pointed. Jacob, too short to see over the railing, was lifted up by his father. In the dappled shade beneath a large oak tree, 2 black bear cubs were engaged in what appeared to be a wrestling match. The larger one, Guardian, was clearly stronger, but was playing gently with his smaller sibling. Toast, the younger cub, looked remarkably improved from the weak, injured animal they had last seen. His coat was glossy, his movements energetic, though Michael noticed he still favored his previously injured paw slightly. What caught everyone's attention, however, was the small, worn teddy bear sitting propped against the log near where the cubs played. "Bear!" Jacob exclaimed, pointing excitedly. "2 bears, and Teddy!" At the sound of his voice, both cubs stopped their play and looked up toward the observation deck. It could have been coincidence. Their movement or scent could have alerted the animals, but it seemed for all the world as if the bears recognized Jacob's voice. Toast, the younger cub, made a soft huffing sound and moved toward the edge of the enclosure below them, standing up on his hind legs to get a better look. "That's unusual, Doctor," Carter said, watching with professional interest. "They typically avoid the observation deck when humans are present. We've been careful to minimize interaction." Guardian, the older cub, approached more cautiously, staying slightly behind his sibling but clearly curious. Jacob wriggled in his father's arms, trying to get closer. "Bears remembered Jacob," he stated with absolute certainty. Dr. Carter looked skeptical but intrigued. "Bears do have excellent memory, especially for people or situations associated with food or danger. But this level of recognition after a single brief encounter weeks ago, it's unexpected." Toast made another sound, a soft whine that rose in pitch, and reached one paw up toward the deck as if trying to climb the barrier. "He's never done that before," Dr. Carter murmured, taking notes on a small pad she carried. Savannah, who had been quietly taking photos, whispered, "This is extraordinary. The body language, the vocalizations, it's exactly what bear cubs use to communicate with family members they've been separated from." Jacob squirmed until Michael set him down on the observation deck. Before anyone could stop him, he had slipped between the adults and was standing at the railing, his small fingers gripping the lowest bar as he peered down at the cubs. "Hello, bears," he called softly. "Jacob, visit bears." Toast responded immediately, standing fully upright and making more urgent sounds. Guardian moved up beside his sibling, both cubs now gazing intently at the small boy above them. "I've never seen anything like this," Dr. Carter said, moving to stand protectively near Jacob. "It defies conventional understanding of wild animal behavior." Michael put a hand on his son's shoulder. "What do you think, buddy? Are they happy to see you?" Jacob nodded emphatically. "Bears, say hello to Jacob." He reached into his pocket and pulled out the small bag of blueberries he had insisted on bringing. "Oh, I'm sorry," Lily said to Dr. Carter. "He really wanted to bring something for them. We tried to explain they have their own food here." "To their surprise, Doctor." Carter smiled thoughtfully. "Actually, this presents an interesting opportunity. We've been working on teaching them to forage for native berries, but Toast has been reluctant to try new foods." She considered for a moment. "What if we use this as a positive reinforcement exercise, under controlled conditions, of course?" She led them down from the observation deck to a small gated entry area adjacent to the enclosure. It contained a mechanism for delivering food and enrichment items into the habitat without direct human contact. "We can place the berries in this feeding tray," she explained. "It extends into the enclosure through that portal. The cubs will associate the food with the mechanical system, not with humans." Jacob carefully placed his blueberries in the metal tray, watching with fascination as Dr. Carter used a hand crank to extend it into the bear habitat. The cubs had followed them around the perimeter of their enclosure and were now waiting expectantly where the feeding tray would appear. Guardian approached first, sniffing cautiously at the offering. Toast hung back until his brother had tested one berry, then moved forward eagerly. "Look at that," Dr. Carter said with professional excitement. "Toast is trying the berries without hesitation. We've been trying to introduce new foods for days with limited success." Savannah captured the moment with her camera, the two cubs sharing the small handful of blueberries while Jacob watched with utter delight from the other side of the safety barrier. "Bears like berries," Jacob announced proudly. "They certainly do, Doctor," Carter agreed. "And this is exactly the kind of food they'll need to recognize and find for themselves in the wild." They spent nearly an hour observing the cubs. Dr. Carter, increasingly intrigued by the unusual interaction, took copious notes on the bear's behavior. She pointed out how Toast kept returning to the teddy bear between activities, dragging it to new positions around the enclosure. "We've been documenting his attachment to the toy," she explained. "It's an interesting case study in comfort objects for traumatized wildlife. Controversial in rehabilitation circles, but the results are compelling." As their visit drew to a close, Jacob became subdued. "Bears stay here?" he asked, understanding that he would be leaving without his new friends. "Yes, sweetie," Lily explained gently. "The bears need to stay here so they can grow strong and learn to be wild bears." Jacob considered this seriously, then nodded. "Bears have good home?" Dr. Carter knelt to Jacob's level. "Would you like to come visit them again sometime? I think your visits might actually be beneficial to their development, especially Toast's. He seems more engaged and willing to try new things when you're here." Jacob's face lit up. Visit bears again. As they prepared to leave, Dr. Carter pulled Michael and Lily aside. "I know this might sound unusual," she said, "but I'd like your permission to document this case more formally. The connection between your son and these cubs, particularly the younger one, it's scientifically significant. We might learn important things about wildlife rehabilitation and trauma recovery in young animals." Michael and Lily exchanged glances, both thinking the same thing. Their son's ordinary life had taken an extraordinary turn, and there seemed to be no going back. "What would that involve?" Michael asked cautiously. "Regular visits, carefully documented, perhaps some controlled interaction experiments, always with safety as the top priority. I'd like to bring in a colleague who specializes in animal cognition and bonding behaviors." Lily thought about Jacob's daily questions about the bears, his concern for them, his instant connection with them. "I think Jacob would like that," she said slowly. "As long as it helps the bears." Dr. Carter smiled. "I believe it will, and it might help many other orphaned animals in the future if we can better understand these connections." As they walked back to their cars, Savannah showed them some of the photos she'd captured. "These are remarkable," she said, scrolling through images of Jacob and the bears seemingly communicating across species boundaries. "They tell a story that words alone never could." Jacob, walking between his parents and holding their hands, looked up at the forest canopy above them. "Bears will be happy in forest someday," he said, with the simple certainty of a child who believes in happy endings. Michael squeezed his son's small hand. "Yes, buddy, I think they will be." What none of them realized then was that the journey was just beginning. Not just for the orphaned bears learning to be wild, or for Jacob growing into his remarkable empathy, but for an entire community being transformed by a single act of innocent compassion. Summer arrived in Pinewood, bringing warm days and the kind of thunderstorms that made the forest smell alive. Jacob Hayes, who had recently celebrated his 3rd birthday, had become something of a local celebrity, the Bear Boy, as some called him, though never to his parents' faces. The Hayes family had settled into a new routine that included bi-weekly visits to the Oak Ridge Wildlife Sanctuary. Each visit was carefully documented by Dr. Carter and her team, who had indeed begun a formal study on what they termed cross-species empathetic bonding in traumatized wildlife. The bear cubs, Guardian and Toast, were thriving. They had nearly doubled in size since their rescue, and both were showing promising signs of developing the skills they would need for eventual release back into the wild. Toast still carried Jacob's teddy bear occasionally, though less frequently as he grew stronger and more confident. The sanctuary staff had begun the delicate process of gradually removing human associations from the cubs' environment, a necessary step toward their return to true wildness. Jacob understood this transition better than anyone expected a 3-year-old could. "Bears learning to be wild," he would explain seriously to anyone who asked about his friends. Savannah Reed's children's book, titled The Boy Who Whispered to Bears, was in its final stages of production. The story followed a fictional child named Sam, who helped rescue orphaned bear cubs, teaching gentle lessons about empathy, conservation, and respecting wildlife along the way. The illustrations, based on Savannah's photographs but altered to protect Jacob's privacy, captured the magical connection between a child and bear that had so moved the community. The story might have remained a treasured but local tale, were it not for what happened on a humid Tuesday in July. Michael and Lily had taken Jacob for his regular sanctuary visit, accompanied this time not just by Savannah, but also by Dr. Marcus Chen, an animal cognition specialist from the State University, who had joined Dr. Carter's research project. The day had proceeded normally, Jacob observing the cubs, Dr. Carter and Dr. Chen taking notes on their interactions, Savannah capturing photographs for the sanctuary's educational materials. They were preparing to leave when the sanctuary's emergency alarm system began blaring throughout the facility. "What's happening?" Lily asked, instinctively pulling Jacob closer. Dr. Carter was immediately alert, pulling out her radio. "Carter here. What's the situation?" The crackling response was difficult to make out, but the word fire came through clearly. "There's a forest fire approaching from the northwest," Dr. Carter explained, her professional calm belied by the tension in her eyes. "We have emergency evacuation protocols for all the animals, but it's going to be challenging. Some can't be transported easily." The sanctuary erupted into organized chaos as staff members rushed to implement emergency procedures. Dr. Carter directed Michael, Lily, and Jacob toward the main exit. "You should leave now, before the roads might be closed. We'll handle things here." But as they hurried toward the parking lot, a staff member ran up to Dr. Carter, out of breath. "The bear cub enclosure. We can't get to it. The access road is already blocked by fallen burning timber from the ridge above." Dr. Carter's composed expression faltered. "Are you sure? What about the northwest service path? Smoke's too thick. We tried but couldn't get through. Fire's moving faster than predicted." Jacob, who had been listening intently, suddenly spoke up. "Bears scared? Bears hurt?" Dr. Carter knelt to his level, choosing honesty. "The bears might be scared of the fire, Jacob. We're trying to figure out how to help them." Jacob's face set with determination. "Jacob, help bears." Lily tightened her hold on her son's hand. "No, sweetheart, the fire is dangerous. The sanctuary people will help the bears." But Dr. Carter had a thoughtful expression. "The cubs know Jacob," she said slowly. "They respond to him differently than to any of our staff. You can't possibly be suggesting using a child in an emergency situation," Michael said sharply. "No, of course not," Dr. Carter assured him. "But there might be a way to use their connection." She explained quickly that there was an emergency evacuation tunnel leading directly into the bear enclosure, designed precisely for situations when the main access was compromised. The problem was getting the cubs to enter the tunnel willingly from their side.